January 27, 2026, India signed what European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen called the mother of all trade deals, a free trade agreement with the European Union, 20 years of negotiations, 2 billion people, a quarter of global GDP, tariffs slashed on 97% of goods, 4 billion euros in annual duty savings, double the exports, 800,000 European jobs already dependent on Indian trade, about to become 1.5 million. Nobody saw it coming because nobody thought it was possible. For 2 decades, this deal had been the diplomatic equivalent of a ghost ship, always on the horizon, never arriving. Technical disputes over dairy quotas, arguments about labor standards. The usual bureaucratic death spiral that kills ambitious agreements before they're born. Then geopolitics changed the math. America slapped 50% tariffs on Indian goods. The EU needed to reduce dependence on China. India needed reliable partners while navigating a trade war it didn't start. Suddenly, 2 governments that couldn't agree on cheese found common ground on semiconductors, renewable energy, and defense technology. The timing tells you everything. Von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa weren't just at the World Economic Forum talking about trade. They were in New Delhi for India's Republic Day. Front row seats at the parade, a diplomatic message written in fighter jet formations and ballistic missile displays. This wasn't a trade deal, this was a realignment. And it happened the same month Washington was threatening India over Russian oil, while simultaneously begging New Delhi to buy more of it. Let that contradiction settle for a moment. The United States imposed punitive tariffs on India, 25% for buying Russian oil, another 25% tagged as reciprocal, 50% total. Then crude prices spiked past $100 a barrel after strikes on Iran. Suddenly, the same administration demanding India stop Russian oil purchases quietly asked India to resume them. Not because policy changed, because markets did. India had been importing 1.5 million barrels of Russian crude daily, over a third of total imports. Cheap energy keeping inflation manageable while funding infrastructure projects that employ millions. Washington pressured. India complied, reluctantly. It hurt. Then the Iran crisis exploded, and the US came back with a sanctions waiver and a request. Please buy Russian oil again. We need prices stabilized. India, which had just absorbed a strategic cost to appease Washington, was handed leverage with no strings attached. That's not luck, that's positioning. Most countries get trapped between great powers, forced to choose sides, absorb costs, explain themselves. India built something different, a foreign policy model where every major player needs India for something specific, which means nobody can afford to push too hard in any one direction. Iran lets Indian ships through the Strait of Hormuz during a blockade because India sheltered Iranian sailors. Washington gives India oil waivers it won't give Germany because India counterbalances China. The EU signs a trade deal in the middle of a US tariff war because Brussels needs supply chain diversification that doesn't route through Beijing. This isn't neutrality. Neutrality is passive. This is active multi-alignment. And the only reason it works is because India spent decades building relationships that make it useful to everyone simultaneously. There's a term for this: strategic autonomy. It sounds abstract, academic, the kind of thing diplomats say at conferences while nothing actually happens. But watch what India did in the first 4 months of 2026. Signed a historic trade deal with Europe, negotiated down US tariffs from 50% to 18%, sheltered an Iranian warship while maintaining defense partnerships with Israel, hosted naval exercises with both Russia and the United States in the same quarter, bought Russian S-400 missile systems and American P-8 Poseidon aircraft, built a port in Iran that America needs access to, and extracted a sanctions waiver while maintaining defense partnerships with Israel, hosted naval exercises with both Russia and the United States in the same quarter, bought Russian S-400 missile systems and American P-8 Poseidon aircraft, built a port in Iran that America needs access to, and extracted a sanctions waiver to keep it operational. Every one of those moves contradicts the others if you're thinking in Cold War logic. Pick a side, align your interests. But that framework assumes the world still has clear sides to pick. It doesn't. America needs India to counter China, but won't commit to defending India if China attacks. Russia sells India weapons, but also sells the same systems to China. Europe wants Indian markets, but lectures about democracy. China offers infrastructure loans while building ports that encircle India. India looked at that chessboard and decided not to play the game everyone else was playing. Instead, it built a position where it's the only country that can talk to all sides and be trusted by none completely, but needed by all constantly. The EU trade deal crystallizes this. India didn't sign it because Brussels suddenly loved New Delhi. It signed because both sides looked at the global landscape and realized they needed each other more than they needed ideological purity. The EU gets an alternative to Chinese manufacturing and a gateway to South Asian markets. India gets technology transfer, investment, and tariff-free access to 450 million consumers. But here's the part that makes this precarious. Strategic autonomy only works if you keep executing it flawlessly under pressure. The second India makes a definitive choice toward one bloc, the leverage evaporates. The oil waivers disappear, the safe corridors close, the mediator's chair gets pulled away, and pressure is building from every direction. India chairs BRICS in 2026. Russia and China are pushing for stronger anti-Western coordination. Simultaneously, India is deepening Quad partnerships with the US, Japan, and Australia. It's hosting Iranian warships while co-sponsoring UN resolutions against Tehran, buying Russian oil while signing defense frameworks with Washington. Every phone call requires perfect calibration. Every statement needs 3 audiences considered simultaneously. This is the Highwire Act. Not choosing sides isn't the same as having no position. It's having every position at once and making each player believe you're closer to them than you actually are. Exhausting, sophisticated, fragile. March 2026 showed the limits. When that US submarine torpedoed the Iranian frigate in Indian waters, New Delhi found out the same way everyone else did. By watching the explosion on radar, India sheltered the survivors, maintained relationships with both Washington and Tehran, and issued carefully worded statements that offended neither. But the incident revealed something uncomfortable. India doesn't control what happens in the Indian Ocean. It just responds really well to what others decide to do there. The EU deal, the oil waivers, the safe passage through Hormuz, all of it proves India has leverage. Real, tangible, unprecedented leverage. But leverage isn't power. Leverage is the ability to extract concessions by being useful. Power is the ability to set terms because others have no alternative. India has leverage. China has power. America has power. India has the fastest growing major economy, a massive domestic market, and geographic position that makes it indispensable. But indispensable to everyone means committed to no one. And that only works until someone forces a choice. The question isn't whether India can maintain this balancing act, it's whether the world will let it, because the same factors that make India valuable, large economy, strategic location, capable military, also make India a prize worth fighting over. Every major power wants India closer to their orbit, and the pressure to choose isn't going to decrease. It's going to intensify. India just signed the largest trade deal in its history with Europe while negotiating down American tariffs and maintaining energy imports from Russia. That's not confusion. That's the highest level of diplomatic execution happening anywhere on the planet right now. But execution has to be perfect every single time. One miscalculation, one definitive move in the wrong direction, and the entire structure collapses. India built a foreign policy that works by being needed everywhere and tied down nowhere. The EU deal proves it's working. What happens when the players who need India start demanding exclusivity is the test nobody's figured out how to pass yet. April 1st, 2026. 3 million census workers fanned out across India carrying tablets instead of paper for the first time in history. The world's largest population count had begun, but buried in the bureaucratic language of forms and household surveys was a decision that hadn't been made in 94 years. India would enumerate caste, not just collect the data, publish it, make it official, turn social hierarchy into a statistical reality that could reshape political representation, welfare distribution, and the entire federal structure of the country. Nobody saw this coming because nobody thought any government would touch it. Caste enumeration is the third rail of Indian politics. The last time it happened was 1931 under British colonial rule. Every government since independence avoided it. Too divisive, too dangerous, too likely to fracture the coalition holding the country together. Then the 2026 census made it policy. The implications are staggering. India's lower house of parliament, the Lok Sabha, currently has 543 seats. Those seats were frozen in 1976 based on the 1971 census to prevent population growth from punishing states that implemented family planning. That freeze expires in 2026. When the new census data comes in, Parliament will redraw the entire electoral map based on current population. Southern states are panicking. Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Karnataka, and Andhra Pradesh successfully reduced birth rates. Their populations stabilized. Northern states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar did not. Their populations exploded. Under a population-based reallocation, the South loses seats, the North gains them. Political power shifts from states that developed faster to states that grew larger. Tamil Nadu's chief minister called it a punishment for success. Kerala's government warned it would destroy federalism. But the math is unavoidable. Uttar Pradesh has 240 million people and 80 seats. Tamil Nadu has 78 million people and 39 seats. Uttar Pradesh has 3 times the population, but only twice the representation. When delimitation happens, the South's voice in Parliament shrinks while the North's expands. Now add caste data to that equation. For the first time in nearly a century, India will have official numbers on exactly how many people belong to which caste categories. Scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, other backward classes, and the general category. That data will determine reservation quotas in government jobs, university admissions, and parliamentary constituencies. Political parties have been demanding this for decades. They want the numbers to justify expanding reservations beyond the current 50% cap. But once the data exists, it can't be controlled. Every group will see exactly where they stand numerically. Every state will compare its share of resources to its share of population. Every caste will know whether it's overrepresented or underrepresented in government institutions. The census isn't just counting people, it's creating the statistical foundation for every political argument India will have for the next 20 years. And it's happening digitally. No paper forms, no manual entry. Every response recorded on a tablet and uploaded in real time to a central database. India is building the largest biometric and demographic data set on Earth. 1.4 billion people, every household, every individual, all of it cross-referenced with Aadhaar, India's biometric ID system that already holds fingerprints and iris scans for over 1 billion citizens. The data India collects over the next year won't just count people. It will define power, every seat redrawn, every quota recalculated, every federal relationship renegotiated based on numbers that haven't been updated in 50 years. India didn't just do something no one saw coming. India did several things simultaneously that contradict each other completely and somehow made all of them work. That's not policy. That's highwire diplomacy at a scale no other country is attempting. And the only way it continues working is if India never stops moving.